Pruitt-Igoe was completed in the middle of the 1950s. Those people who were involved with it, the engineers and the planners and the architects, the city officials and federal officials, felt that they had really solved the problems of locating low-income families. From everything that I can gather, what really happened in Pruitt-Igoe was a breakdown of the housing authority operations to a certain extent.
People want to say mismanagement. I won't say that. So I was going to say tenants. I won't say that. I think it was just a whole thing of everything combined that they let the little small things get out of hand and they led to big things.
Well, I think that the thing that happened was the dope dealers. I mean, when they moved in, the people moved out.
What really resulted was a very, very isolated development. The community became totally dysfunctional.
A lot of people got scared and they moved out. They thought something might happen to them.
Another reason is they probably didn't have enough money to keep it up. A lot of broken windows and stuff. A lot like that.
You know, like pipes get busting and stuff, water running in your house, you know, all that.
People have to move out their houses because water was running in their houses. They didn't have enough money to pay for the help fix the thing that was broke.
There were some modernization grants that were made by the federal government for Pruitt-Igoe, but all of them really failed in the sense that they were simply too little and too late.
Remember Pruitt-Igoe, that it was a failure. Not because I failed and others failed, because somebody else failed us in Pruitt-Igoe.
It really became a national monument to the failure of public housing, which is really a shame because now with the tenant management in St. Louis, I think the very positive side of the public housing program and its residents can be seen.
One of the conditions of the rent strike settlement that took place here in 1969 in St. Louis was the involvement of the tenants in the actual management of their particular developments.
We wrote a provision into the rent strike agreement which provided that the tenants in their particular areas would be able to assume management responsibility at some point in the future when the St. Louis Housing Authority and the individual Tenant Affairs Board representatives felt that their areas were ready to assume that responsibility. But very honestly, at the point that we settled the strike in October of 1969, none of us really had a very clear idea of precisely what tenant management was, and from an administrative point of view, none of us really knew the structure of that tenant management approach and exactly how it was going to be implemented. That came about over the course of the next several years. After the Tenant Affairs Board was constituted at the end of the public housing rent strike.
We have a policy-making board, which is called the Board of Commissioners, which is appointed by the mayor of this city. It's 5 members. 2 of those members are tenants who actually reside in public housing here in the city of St. Louis. Now, directly under the policy-making mechanism is the staff, which is, at this point, as I'm the top staff official. Involved in between us is the tenant input.
The first item on the agenda, the demolition of Pruitt-Igoe. The Tenant Affairs Board in June agreed with the Housing Authority that the Pruitt-Igoe development should be closed, and for a myriad of reasons. And we thought that it would be most advantageous to have the residents in Pruitt relocated to other developments throughout the authority. We also determined at that point that if there would be any action taken on the Pruitt-Igoe site, that the Tenant Affairs Board would be involved in those discussions. And I think that the proposed contemplation of the authority to demolition the buildings in Pruitt-Igoe merits discussion by and between the TAB and the Board of Commissioners. I'd like to know, will the buildings be demolitioned without gutting the building first?
The buildings are pretty well gutted as they are now anyhow. So I think it's just a matter of trying to get whatever we think is salvageable out of the buildings and proceed from there.
But at any rate, there's nothing in the immediate, very immediate future, although we are trying to get ready for it when we get the okays.
Are there any other comments about demolition Pruitt-Igoe from the board members?
Yes, I have a couple of things that I have in mind. Like some of the lampposts and some of the trees. I'd like to know, if the board sees any problem with some of those being removed to my development.
Well, the board doesn't see any problem. We don't know what kind of legal problem.
You got a good shovel?
There's no problem with the trees, and I'll check it out with the city. Those are really our light stands. Those are private streets, so I don't see any problem with that, Gene. I can check it out with the engineers, but I don't see any problem. I hope you got a good shovel.
Well, I hope you got a
They are elected representatives of their particular project who serve on a joint board which is made up of all the tenants. They elect their president, secretary, what have you. Now, a spin-off from the tenant representative has been the involvement of a tenant management corporation known as TMC. What that has been is that a particular project has developed their own board of directors and has gotten their own corporate entity. So one particular project has chose to be identified as a TMC, so which means that they in turn then come to the authority as a legal corporation and contract with the authority for the actual management of the project.
There's certain things the authority has to suggest to each manager in order to keep the development running. We have to listen to that. Because certainly we don't want it to fall down, but as a tenant manager and being a part of the Tenant Affairs Board, that gives me the opportunity to sit right in with the Board of Commissioners and help make the decisions about public housing.
The relationship I have is that the Housing Authority has signed a contract with my Tenant Management Board of Directors, which places me in a management position on the Housing Authority payroll. The function within Peabody, as long as I'm within the guidelines of the tenant lease, the guidelines of the Housing Authority's personnel manual, then my relationship is that I'm free to perform in any function that I feel would be conducive to building up the morale and the physical structure of Peabody.
My name is Dorothy Vine. I'm building manager for Doris Tenant Management. My job is to see that the building is maintained. Each building has one custodian that does all the custodial work, and I work along with him. But when I finish with this, I'll sweep the back drive for you, okay? Okay, I'll see you later.
It had really went down to the dumps, but it's just got the right people to pull it up again. And also, since Mrs. King been in for management, and when she tell you what she wants, she kind of means that. And then it's like I said, if the people want the place pulled up, it's not hard to get them to follow. So we got, I would say, 2 great building captains and a manager I'm crazy about, and I think she's doing a wonderful job.
Used to be time that you didn't know your neighbor or your downstairs people under you, but now with the tenant meetings, you get to know them, and it makes a difference.
Ann? Hi, how are you today?
Okay, and you?
Oh, pretty good. I have some flyers for you to distribute to the people on your breezeway. Okay, this is regarding some job applications for the teenagers that live in the building. We formed landscape crews who help plant grass, and also we have cleanup crews. These are teenagers that we've hired through our tenant organization to work weekends when there's no custodian to do our work. Part of my job also is to set up cleaning schedules for tenants on each breezeway. Each person has a time to do their steps according to the number of people on the breezeway. Thank you very much, and I'll see you later.
The building managers, and in our low-rise tenant management areas, we call them lane managers. They are salaried individuals, and they work in conjunction with the resident managers and really serve as management lieutenants in their own individual building. The framework of the tenant management corporations really mirrors that of any housing authority operation. We have a resident manager, an assistant resident manager, a management aide who is responsible for doing the annual reviews and leasing of apartments and much of the technical rent computation that goes on with admissions and continued occupancy. And in addition to that, we have a clerk typist. We have the positions of building managers and lane managers, which I've just described. All of those individuals are residents of the buildings or lanes in which they reside. And in addition to that, this past year, we were able to add positions of social directors and youth directors to the actual staffing pattern of the Tenant Management Corporation. All right, during the course of the last class, we discussed the public housing law, and today I wanted to take my two partners and myself, in conjunction with the Tenant Affairs Board, conducted a 3-month training program for the tenant management personnel. As you all recall, the modernization funds are used for major kinds of capital expenditures.
It was a very specialized course that was created by us with some technical assistance, some law assistance enforcement agencies, and some of the housing authority staff, because we had to know exactly how the authority operated, what forms had to be filled out for what reason. And the training was very good, very helpful, and we felt like without it, we really wouldn't have been able to really start.
I thought it would be useful to review the way in which the Tenant Affairs Board representatives during the course of 1970 and 71 developed the modernization program for their areas, and then to throw open the discussion so that we can discuss among ourselves the techniques or the ways in which we want to try to get resident preferences in anticipation of getting modernization funds for Darst and Webby this coming year. So, Gene, why don't you review, if you would, with us what went on in Darst during 1970 and 71 and the way in which resident preferences were developed by the tenant organization, which ultimately became your modernization program.
You will have to get into doing some deferred maintenance items, such as fixing the roofs, rather than putting tile on the floors, because it made sense to us not to put tile on the floors and the roof is leaking. It ended up that our roofs, the elevators, the playgrounds, the first floor toilets, these became our priority items.
This is what we're going to have to keep in mind, because the top priority of the residents could be a volleyball courts all over for each building. But we as a board of directors and we as a tenant management will have to say that we know that this is not the main need of our community.
Mr. Hall, did you have a point that you wanted to make?
No, you should have known.
Okay, fine. What the tenant management program has demonstrated is that it is a very effective tool of reaching the families of public housing. All of the activities that go on in each of the tenant management areas are sponsored by the Tenant Management Corporation's Board of Directors, so that the residents of the developments clearly understand that all of the human or soft management programs that are going on, the recreational programs, the field trips, the educational activities, and all of those kinds of events are a result of the tenant management program.
This past summer, through our social service directors and our corporation, we applied for, wrote, and received proposed budget of $30,000 from the State Manpower Planning Commission to put on what we felt was a software attempt at trying to resolve some of the problems in Peabody and at the same time provide jobs for our youth and young adults. And we also had a number of field trips, which the kids and parents went to various parks and had other recreation that required them to travel together on a bus. We are also at this point developing, with the assistance of the Bell Telephone, a program where we can provide shoes for children in Peabody. At this point, we've received 250 pairs of shoes.
Right now, we're really into trying to get our buildings organized and some activities organized among the teenagers and for the younger children. Our skating rink was built a couple of years ago through our modernization funds, and during the summer nights we have anywhere from 200 to 400 children here. The building right adjacent to it is where we plan to put in a mini restaurant for the children and a concession stand and locker rooms.
Families up here have really done a nice job.
Yes, they have. Yes, they have. And they're all, everyone seems to be pretty comfortable and secure. They're walking around. It's just lovely. Just really lovely.
Well, I sure notice there are an awful lot of people that are out strolling now in the afternoons. Boy, this family's done a heck of a job with their flowers.
It's very beautiful.
Yeah.
There's a tremendous difference. Still a long way to go, but they have made tremendous progress. They've increased the occupancy. The rent collections went up. They've implemented far better discipline in the operations than the authority was able to do, and with less aggravations.
The rental collections that were being made prior to Peabody's inception as TMC are being done in a more humane software kind of basis. For instance, instead of Mrs. Jones being given a 3-day notice and ultimately being sued for being delinquent for 30 days, which is 1 month, our lane managers knock on Mrs. Smith's door, talk to her, find out what the problem is, and then get it back to our office. In that instance, we will not begin suing because we make some reasonable arrangement with Mrs. Smith so she can clarify and clear up her matter, her account. When some tenant is delinquent more than 60 days or 90 days, then we take additional steps, which the previous manager at that point had already filed suit. The tenant had been charged, and in many cases, an eviction was very, very imminent.
If a tenant has done something that merits an eviction, before we actually do the eviction, we go to the tenant, we talk to him. It may be that he wants to speak with the members of the board of directors rather than to me. And this is arranged right through my office. And then if in the final decision, this tenant has to be evicted, and he does not like that, he has a right to appeal it through the board of directors. And if they don't please him, then he appeals it right through the housing authority all the way up to the board of commissioners.
But everything is done at the local level. All we're doing, our role as we see it, is just merely to monitor the activity and make our reports as necessary to the federal government. But that's all we want to do, to assist and aid, not to dictate.
We have 6 lane managers in Peabody to cover an area encompassing 657 houses. Each lane manager has approximately 120 to 130 apartments that he is responsible for. One of the functions of the lane manager is to try and resolve any problem that occur in their specific area. If there's a problem that the tenant is having within the lane manager's area that involves a neighbor or the neighbor's children, then the lane manager tries to resolve that. If it can't be resolved at his or her level, then they bring it to the management staff here, and we deal with it.
You're not scared to go out when you got someone you know on the lane to protect you. You can call her and she comes. And that way I have no fear. I can sit out and be comfortable.
As lane managers, we do a little bit of everything. We show people apartments when we have new tenants. When we have people to move out, we have to go in and inspect the apartments. And if maybe there's someone sick on our lane and we haven't seen them for a while, we'll go and check on that person. Or if we see other things that just wrong. Hey, we report this. It don't have to be on our lane, any lane, you know.
And these trash caddies, they're knocking these out.
When the trash men come,
Yeah.
they set them down so hard, a lot of times the handles come off and they break. Sometimes the wheels break.
You lay the tops back like that?
Yes, because if you don't, the trash should be all over everywhere. The people just don't.
Don't you?
And sometimes they're too heavy.
All right, I closed some of them up, but two of them up, to me, in other words, they won't lift them up?
They won't lift them up, and most of the time they're too heavy. They're almost too heavy.
Well, you got the
stand
chain.
now. Most of the time they're too heavy. You can't, sometimes I can't raise them.
The tenants management corporations have done a better custodial job than what the authority was able to perform itself in the past. And we think this is good for the overall benefit of the authority. Ted, yesterday I noticed most of the lids on the containers are being left open. And I've talked to one of your lane managers, and she explained to me that you feel that you get more trash in them if you leave them open. But those that are left open have a little hook on them. And my concern is that if you don't have that hook on them, that lid can blow over, and it could hurt some kid or somebody who's putting trash in. If there's a sudden burst of wind, it's possible that lid may come back over. Speaking of trash, on the high-rise projects, Gene, you want to give us a progress on where you're at with your compactors?
Exactly where we started. We got one in and isn't working. Just this weekend, I understand, somebody from City Hall contacted Sidney Jacks because the fire was still burning in the incinerator after 6 o'clock in the evening. They're threatening to, if they catch this anymore, to find the authority for it. But, I mean, we need the trash compactors to get in as fast as possible. And it just seems to me as long as they've been working on it, they ought to at least have one of them in operation and start on the second.
Okay, we will get a written report to you from Sydney to see where the status is, what the roadblocks or what problems they are experiencing to get the thing going. With that, we'll proceed to security. The project manager has everybody under his control now, the maintenance people, the custodial people, as well as his own administrative staff and security.
In my HUD budget request for submitting for 74-75, I had $78,000, which would be offset by a similar amount of money from LEAA to give me a total of 22.
They have full input into the budget. The budget is then presented to the Board of Commissioners for approval. Upon that effort, then we have it sent to HUD for implementation.
200. Now, does that mean that I'm paying the consultant, buying equipment, as well as the 19 guards, or what?
Okay, Ted, in order to clarify that, we will make up a breakdown of the LEA budget and distribute that according to each of the projects, so that you'll know how much of your budget was charged, how much is set up for LEA by project. You don't know that at this point. Our long-range goal, as I see it, and this again goes into what our whole philosophy here in St. Louis, I think the Housing Authority should be a completely decentralized operation. In other words, we should not be dictating what a particular tenant has to do at a particular project. That should devolve from the management and the particular locality of that project.
Most people know we have 1/3 of our units are vacant. And the top priority now is to get those vacancies filled and to beautify the development, and through modernization funds that we may get from, hopefully from HUD, to replace some of the equipment like the stoves, refrigerators, the cabinets, put tile on the floors for the first time. These kinds of things, create recreation within the development. I think these are our top priorities, as well as trying to establish jobs for the people who don't have them.
There are a very wide range of activities which the Tenant Management Corporation will ultimately get involved in, and I think, though, that the initial emphasis has been to develop a very good, strong professional capability in the area of real estate management, understand what it is to operate a multi-million-dollar development, and at that point in time be prepared to carry out a variety of other activities, all within the umbrella framework of the tenant management program.
There is a great deal of untapped resources in these public housing developments. Mrs. Jones, who has completed high school, was a very apt student in school, but at this point, because she has had several children and unable to leave them and go out and seek additional employment, she's never been tapped to utilize that capability that she developed while she was in school. Through tenant management, through the tenant involvement programs of the Tenant Affairs Board, through the Tenant Association, she can be utilized. And through that kind of involvement, I think that we will develop the kind of worthwhileness and self-awareness that everyone is seeking in tenant management concept and structure. So ultimately, those bodies that are occupying slots in central office will be replaced by residents who are just as capable and competent to handle those slots in the future. And I see this within the next 10 to 15 years.